Who let her in? She's like mold. She just keeps coming back no matter. How many times you try to get rid of her? My cousin Vanessa's voice carried across the crowded penthouse living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago, her words dripping with contempt and cruel amusement as she gestured toward me with her champagne glass. 43 members of my extended family turned to look at me standing near the entrance, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable embarrassment to barely concealed agreement with her assessment. This was supposed to be a celebration of my grandmother's 80th birthday, but Vanessa had just turned it into another opportunity to publicly humiliate me in front of everyone who was supposed to be my family. I stood there in the doorway of the luxury penthouse, holding a beautifully wrapped present for my grandmother, my face burning with shame as laughter rippled through the room. But what none of them knew, what Vanessa especially had no idea about, was that this penthouse she was standing in, this 9,000-square-foot luxury residence with its imported Italian marble and custom everything that she was using as the backdrop for my humiliation, belonged to me. I owned it, every square inch of it. And in about 5 minutes, they were all going to find out. My name is Elena Martinez, and I'm 32 years old. The penthouse we were standing in was worth approximately $8 million, and it was just one of 6 properties I owned across 3 cities. But to my family, especially to Vanessa and her mother, my Aunt Patricia, I was still the poor relation, the family failure, the one who'd somehow never managed to achieve anything worth mentioning despite my expensive education and supposed intelligence. Stay with me here, because what I'm about to tell you is the story of how I went from being the family embarrassment to the family ATM machine in the span of one evening, and why I ultimately decided that some people don't deserve the truth, even when it would benefit them enormously. But before I tell you what happened when security came running and everything exploded in the most satisfying way possible, you need to understand how I became the person standing in that doorway, and why my family had spent 20 years completely underestimating and dismissing me. I grew up in a large Mexican-American family in Chicago, the youngest of 3 children born to working-class parents who valued education above almost everything else. My father worked in construction management, and my mother was a nursing assistant, and they worked brutal hours to provide for us and save money for our education. We lived in a modest house in a middle-class neighborhood, nothing fancy but comfortable enough. My older siblings, Marco and Sophia, were the golden children who followed the script perfectly. Marco became a lawyer, married well, had 3 kids, and lived in the suburbs with a big house and 2 luxury cars. Sophia became a doctor, married another doctor, and had the kind of life that made my mother cry with pride at family gatherings. They were the success stories, the ones who'd made it, the proof that hard work and sacrifice paid off. And then there was me, the one who'd somehow failed to live up to the family's expectations despite having arguably more education and intelligence than either of my siblings. I'd gone to Northwestern University on a full academic scholarship, graduated summa cum laude with a degree in computer science, then went to Stanford for my master's degree in artificial intelligence and machine learning. I was brilliant, objectively, measurably brilliant, in a field that was about to explode into one of the most lucrative and transformative industries in human history. But my family didn't understand technology. They didn't understand what artificial intelligence was or why it mattered. They understood lawyers and doctors. Those were real professions with clear prestige and obvious markers of success. What I did seemed vague and unimpressive to them. I worked with computers, which meant I was basically a glorified tech support person in their minds. The real break with my family's expectations came when I graduated from Stanford, and instead of taking a high-paying job at a major tech company like Google or Microsoft, I joined a tiny startup with 3 other people working out of a cramped office in San Francisco. The startup was developing machine learning algorithms for predictive analytics in healthcare, basically, teaching computers to identify patterns in medical data that could predict disease progression and treatment outcomes. My parents were devastated. My mother actually cried when I told her I was taking a job that paid $60,000 a year instead of the $200,000 offers I'd received from major companies. My father asked me if I'd lost my mind, spending all that money on education only to work for a company that would probably fail within a year like most startups. My siblings were more subtle in their judgment, but I could see it in their eyes at family gatherings. Marco would talk about his important cases, and his partnership track at his law firm. Sophia would discuss her medical research and her publications in prestigious journals, and I would mention my work on machine learning algorithms and see people's eyes glaze over with boredom and confusion. But the worst treatment came from my extended family, particularly from my Aunt Patricia and her daughter Vanessa. They took my career choices as personal affronts somehow, as if I'd deliberately chosen to embarrass the family by working at a no-name startup instead of a prestigious company. Vanessa and I were the same age, had grown up together, and had always been compared to each other by our families. She'd gone into marketing, worked for a well-known consumer goods company, made decent money, and married a man who worked in finance. Her life looked successful on the surface. Nice apartment, expensive clothes, constant social media posts about restaurants and vacations and all the markers of upper-middle-class success. She never missed an opportunity to point out how much better her life choices had been compared to mine. At family gatherings, she'd ask loudly what I was doing now, then make sympathetic noises when I explained I was still at the startup. Still there? Well, I'm sure it will work out eventually. Or you could always get a real job at a real company if you get tired of the uncertainty. My Aunt Patricia was even more direct. She'd tell my mother at family parties, loudly enough for me to hear, that she was worried about my future, that I'd wasted my education and potential, that I needed to get serious about my career before it was too late. She'd compare me unfavorably to Vanessa, to my siblings, to her friends' children who'd made better choices. The worst part was that my own parents began to believe this narrative, not because they were cruel people, but because they genuinely didn't understand what I was doing, or why it had value. They saw me working long hours at a startup that wasn't profitable, living in a tiny apartment in expensive San Francisco, driving an old car, not buying the material, markers of success that would reassure them I'd made it. My mother would call me and gently suggest I look at jobs at real companies. My father would forward me job listings for tech, positions at established corporations, with subject lines like better opportunity. They meant well, but it still hurt to know that even my own parents thought I was failing. And maybe, from their perspective, I was failing. After 2 years at the startup, we still weren't profitable. After 3 years, we were barely surviving. After 4 years, I was still making less than a third of what my classmates at Stanford were making at established companies. I was 30 years old, still in a tiny apartment, still working insane hours, still unable to explain to my family in ways they understood what I actually did all day. The constant judgment wore me down. I started avoiding family gatherings because I dreaded the inevitable questions and comparisons. When I did attend, I'd stay quiet, let Vanessa dominate conversations with her stories about client successes and her husband's finance career, endure my aunt's sympathetic looks and subtle digs about my choices. But here's what none of them knew. And if you're still watching, this is where things get interesting. Because everything they believed about my failure was about to be spectacularly proven wrong. The startup I joined wasn't just surviving, it was about to change everything. The machine learning algorithms we'd developed were genuinely revolutionary. Our system could predict disease progression with accuracy that far exceeded anything else available, and major hospitals and healthcare systems were starting to take notice. In year 5, we signed our first major contract with a hospital network. In year 6, pharmaceutical companies started licensing our technology. In year 7, we were approached by one of the largest healthcare conglomerates in the world with an acquisition offer. They wanted to buy our company for $420 million. My share, as one of the 4 founding team members and the lead developer of our core algorithms, was $94 million after taxes. At age 31, I became a multimillionaire. Not just wealthy, seriously, generationally wealthy. The kind of wealthy where you never worry about money again, where you can buy pretty much anything you want without thinking about the price. But I didn't tell my family. I didn't announce it at gatherings or correct anyone's assumptions about my supposed failure. I just quietly took the money, invested most of it wisely, and went to work for the acquiring company in a senior technical role that paid extremely well and gave me equity in a company worth billions. Why didn't I tell them? Partly because I was hurt and angry after years of judgment and dismissal. Partly because I wanted to see if anyone would ever bother to ask about my life with genuine interest, rather than assumptions and sympathy. And partly because I was curious about what would happen if I just let them continue believing their narrative about me while I lived a completely different reality. I bought the Chicago penthouse 6 months after the acquisition, paying cash for all $8 million of it. It was an investment property. I was still primarily living in San Francisco where I worked, but I wanted something impressive in my hometown. I furnished it beautifully, made it available for high-end short-term rentals through a luxury property management company, and occasionally used it myself when visiting Chicago. The penthouse became somewhat famous in certain circles. It had been featured in architecture magazines. It was used for corporate events and high-end parties. It was known as one of the most desirable properties in downtown Chicago. But because I managed it through a company and maintained my privacy fiercely, very few people knew who actually owned it. Which brings us to my grandmother's 80th birthday party. My Aunt Patricia, who loved to show off and impress people, had wanted to host the party somewhere spectacular. Through her connections, she'd managed to book the penthouse through the property management company for the evening, paying the premium rental fee without knowing she was essentially renting from her niece. I'd found out about the party location when I received the invitation and nearly choked on my coffee when I saw the address. My own penthouse. They were having a family party at my penthouse without having any idea I owned it. The irony was too perfect. I decided I'd attend the party and see what happened. Maybe I'd tell them, maybe I wouldn't. But I wanted to see their faces when they were bragging about this exclusive venue while standing in a property that the family failure had bought with cash arrived at the party fashionably late, taking the private elevator that opened directly into the penthouse foyer. I could hear the party already in full swing. Music, laughter, conversations echoing through the space. I'd dressed carefully, nothing too flashy but clearly expensive if you knew what to look for. I carried a beautifully wrapped present from my grandmother and prepared myself for the inevitable awkwardness. The moment I stepped into the main living room, Vanessa spotted me. Her face did something complicated, surprised that I'd actually shown up, followed by that familiar look of condescending pity, followed by what looked almost like annoyance that I was there at all. She was holding court near the floor-to-ceiling windows, surrounded by cousins and aunts and uncles, clearly playing hostess even though this wasn't actually her event or her space. She'd always been good at inserting herself into the center of attention. That's when she said it, loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Who let her in?" "She's like mold. She just keeps coming back no matter how many times you try to get rid of her." The room went awkwardly quiet. Some people laughed uncomfortably. Others looked embarrassed. My mother's face flushed with anger at Vanessa, but she didn't say anything. She never did when Patricia's side of the family was cruel to me. I stood there for a moment, letting Vanessa's words hang in the air, watching people's reactions. Part of me wanted to walk out, to just leave and never subject myself to this toxic family dynamic again. Part of me wanted to scream at all of them about how successful I actually was, how wrong they'd all been about me. But I did neither of those things. Instead, I smiled. Not a warm smile, not a friendly smile, but a cold, knowing smile that suggested I had information they didn't. "Hello, Vanessa," I said calmly, walking further into the room. "Lovely party. Incredible venue. Have you been enjoying the space?" She looked confused by my tone but recovered quickly. "Oh, it's amazing, isn't it? My mother was able to book it through her connections. This penthouse is apparently very exclusive. Only certain people can even rent it. It's usually reserved for corporate events and celebrities and actually successful people." The implication was clear. Not people like me. People like her. People who'd made something of themselves. "Fascinating," I said, my smile widening slightly. "And how much did she pay to rent it for the evening?" Vanessa looked taken aback by the question. "I don't think that's any of your business. But since you asked, it was $25,000 just for tonight. Worth every penny for Grandma's party, of course. Though I suppose that's more than you probably make in a month at your little computer job." Several people gasped at the blatant rudeness. My grandmother, sitting in the place of honor near the windows, looked upset but confused. My mother finally found her voice. "Vanessa, that's enough. Elena is family and she's welcome here." "Of course she's welcome," Aunt Patricia interjected smoothly, moving to stand beside her daughter. "No one is saying otherwise. We're just surprised to see Elena at an event like this." We didn't think this kind of gathering was really her scene anymore. She seems to prefer simpler things these days. The condescension was masterful. Nothing overtly rude, but the message was clear. I didn't belong in luxury spaces. I wasn't sophisticated enough for this crowd. I should probably stick to my little apartment and my little job and leave the nice things to people who could actually afford them. And that's when I decided I was going to tell them. Not because I wanted their approval or their apologies, but because I was done being treated like a failure by people who had no idea what they were talking about. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the now silent room, this venue is very much my scene. In fact, I'd say it's about as much my scene as it's possible to be. Vanessa laughed, that cruel, superior laugh I'd heard 1,000 times before. What, you've been to parties here before? Crashed some corporate events? That sounds about right. I own it, I said simply. This penthouse. I bought it 8 months ago for $8 million. Cash. Your mother didn't rent it through her connections, Vanessa. She rented it through my property management company. She's literally been paying me $25,000 to host a party in my own home while insulting me to my face. The silence that followed my statement was so complete you could have heard a pin drop on the marble floors. You could see the moment my words registered on Vanessa's face. First confusion, like her brain was trying to process information that didn't fit her worldview. Then disbelief, like she was certain I must be lying or joking. Then something that looked almost like panic, as she started to consider the possibility that I might be telling the truth. You're lying, she said, but her voice had lost its confident, mocking tone. There's no way you could afford to buy a place like this. You work at some startup that probably doesn't even pay you properly. Worked, I corrected calmly. Past tense. The startup I worked at was acquired 2 years ago for $420 million. My share after taxes was $94 million. I currently work as a senior AI architect for the acquiring company, with a base salary of $800,000 annually, plus substantial equity and bonuses. This penthouse was one of the first investments I made with my acquisition money. Would you like to see the property deed? I have the digital copy on my phone. The room exploded with noise, people talking over each other, asking questions, expressing shock and disbelief. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, tears immediately forming in her eyes. My father just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. My siblings looked completely stunned. And my grandmother, dear sweet woman, actually started laughing. Not cruel laughter, but genuine amusement at the situation. But Vanessa and Aunt Patricia weren't laughing. They'd gone pale, both of them clearly trying to process this information and figure out if there was any way I could be lying or exaggerating. If this is true, Aunt Patricia said, her voice tight and controlled, why wouldn't you have told us? Why would you let us think you were struggling financially? I didn't let you think anything, I replied, my voice still calm but now with an edge. I never once said I was struggling. You all just assumed I was because you didn't understand my career or my choices. You decided I was a failure without ever asking about my actual situation. You judged me, dismissed me, pitied me, and mocked me for years without ever once showing genuine interest in what I was actually doing or how I was actually living. I pulled out my phone and opened my digital wallet, where I kept scanned copies of important documents. But since you seem to need proof, here's the property deed showing Elena Martinez as owner of this address, purchased for $8.2 million in March of last year. Here's a screenshot of one of my investment accounts showing current holdings of approximately $47 million. Here's my employee profile at my company showing my position and confirming my salary range. Would you like to see more? I held out my phone toward Vanessa and Aunt Patricia. Vanessa actually stumbled backward, refusing to look, as if the evidence of my success might physically hurt her. Aunt Patricia took the phone with shaking hands and scrolled through the documents, her face going from pale to flushed as she realized I was telling the absolute truth. Oh my God, my mother whispered, moving toward me. Elena, why didn't you tell us? We've been so worried about you. You weren't worried about me, Mama, I said, and I couldn't keep the hurt out of my voice now. You were disappointed in me. There's a difference. You thought I'd made bad choices, that I'd wasted my education, that I needed to get a real job at a real company. You never asked if I was happy or if my work was meaningful or if I was achieving the goals I'd set for myself. You just compared me to Marco and Sophia and Vanessa and found me lacking. My father spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. Mija, we didn't understand. We should have asked more questions, shown more interest. But we're your parents. We just wanted to know you were okay, that you could take care of yourself. I bought an $8 million penthouse with cash. Papa, I think it's safe to say I can take care of myself. The room was still buzzing with shocked conversation. I could hear my cousins talking rapidly to each other, hear aunts and uncles expressing disbelief and amazement. But Vanessa and Aunt Patricia stood frozen, and I could see the exact moment they realized the full implications of what had just been revealed. They'd spent years mocking me, years of subtle digs and not-so-subtle comparisons, years of treating me like the family charity case who needed sympathy and gentle guidance toward better choices. And they'd done it while I was quietly becoming wealthier than any of them could ever dream of being. Vanessa's husband, I'd barely registered his presence until now, suddenly spoke up. Vanessa, maybe you should apologize to Elena. I think you may have been a bit harsh over the years. A bit harsh? I laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. She just compared me to mold in front of 43 people while standing in my own home that her mother is paying me to rent. I'd say that goes slightly beyond a bit harsh. If you're enjoying this story, make sure you're subscribed because it gets even better, and you won't believe what Vanessa tried to do next. My cousin Diego, who'd always been relatively kind to me even during the years of family judgment, stepped forward with a huge grin on his face. Elena, this is insane. We all thought, you never said anything. You let us all think you were struggling when you were apparently crushing it this whole time. That's both impressive and kind of savage. I wasn't trying to be savage, I said honestly. I was just waiting to see if anyone would ever ask about my life with genuine interest instead of pity or judgment. Nobody did. You all made your assumptions and never questioned them. My grandmother finally spoke, her elderly voice somehow cutting through all the other noise in the room. Come here, Elena. Come sit with me. I walked over to where she sat in the comfortable chair I'd personally selected when furnishing the penthouse. She took my hands in hers, her eyes searching my face. You've been hurt, she said simply. By all of us. We've made you feel like you had to hide your success because we were too stupid or too narrow-minded to see what you were building. That was wrong of us, Mija. I'm sorry. Tears stung my eyes for the first time since this whole scene had started. My grandmother's understanding and genuine apology meant more than anything else could have. Thank you, Abuela. That means a lot. But, she continued, a slight smile playing at her lips, you also let us make fools of ourselves for quite a while when you could have corrected our misunderstandings earlier. So perhaps we're even? I couldn't help but laugh at that. Perhaps. Vanessa finally found her voice again, though it came out strangled and desperate. I didn't mean, I was just joking earlier. You know how I am. I just say things without thinking. I never actually thought you were a failure or anything like that. Yes, you did, I interrupted firmly. You've thought that and said that explicitly for years. You've compared yourself to me constantly and found yourself superior in every way. You've used me as an example of what not to do with your life. You've mocked my career choices, my income, my apartment, my car, everything about my life, to make yourself feel better about your own choices. Don't pretend now that you were just joking or that you didn't mean it. Elena, please. Aunt Patricia started, but I cut her off too. Aunt Patricia, you've been even worse than Vanessa in some ways. You've told my mother repeatedly that you were concerned about my future, that I'd wasted my potential, that I needed to get serious about my career. You've compared me unfavorably to Vanessa at every family gathering for years. You've treated me like I was an embarrassment to the family, and you did it all while knowing absolutely nothing about my actual life or circumstances. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. What could she say? Everything I'd stated was factually true, and multiple people in the room had witnessed it happening over the years. My brother Marco stepped forward, putting his hand on my shoulder. Elena, I owe you an apology too. I've been condescending about your career for years, thinking my law degree made me more successful than your computer science work. I feel like an idiot now. Sophia nodded in agreement. Same. I made assumptions based on salary and prestige without ever really understanding what you were doing or why it was valuable. I'm sorry, Hermana. I appreciated their apologies, but I also noticed they were apologizing now that my success was undeniable and impressive by conventional standards. Would they have apologized if I'd remained at the startup and stayed happy but not wealthy? Probably not. There's something else you all should know, I continued, deciding to lay everything out now that I'd started. This penthouse isn't my only property. I also own 2 condos in San Francisco, a house in Austin, a condo in New York, and a vacation home in Cabo San Lucas. My total net worth is approximately $78 million at last calculation, though that fluctuates with market conditions and my various investments. I travel internationally frequently for both work and pleasure. I drive a Tesla Model S in San Francisco, and I have a BMW reserved for when I'm in Chicago. I donate roughly $2 million annually to various charities and educational programs. I live a very comfortable life, and I've lived that life for the past 2 years while watching all of you pity me. The silence that greeted this additional information was somehow even more profound than before. I'd just described a level of wealth and success that exceeded everyone else in the family combined, including Marco with his law partnership and Sophia with her medical practice, and Vanessa with her corporate marketing job. My cousin Maria, who'd always been bluntly honest, finally said what others were probably thinking. So basically, you're the richest person in this entire family and you just let us treat you like you were poor. That's either incredibly patient or incredibly petty, and I'm not sure which. Maybe both, I admitted. I was hurt by how I was treated, and part of me wanted to see if anyone would ever look past their assumptions and prejudices to actually see me. But also, I've been so busy building my life and my career that I honestly haven't spent that much time thinking about family dynamics. I've been focused on my work, my research, the problems I'm trying to solve. Your opinions of me, while hurtful, haven't been at the center of my world. Vanessa, who'd been increasingly pale and silent during this conversation, suddenly turned and rushed toward the bathroom. We could hear her retching behind the closed door. Apparently, the stress and embarrassment had literally made her sick. Aunt Patricia glared at me as if this was somehow my fault. Was it really necessary to humiliate her like this? You could have told us privately instead of making a scene. I didn't make a scene, I interrupted. Vanessa made a scene when she compared me to mold in front of 43 people. I simply corrected her grossly inaccurate understanding of my situation. If she's embarrassed, that's a natural consequence of spending years being cruel to someone based on false assumptions. My mother came over and hugged me tightly, crying now. I'm so sorry, Mija. We've been terrible parents. We should have supported you, believed in you, been proud of you, regardless of what we understood about your work. We should have... Mama, it's okay, I said, hugging her back. You and Papa did support me. You paid for my education. You raised me to work hard and believe in myself. You were just confused and worried when my path didn't look like what you expected. I understand that even if it hurt. My father joined the hug, and for a moment it was just the 3 of us, while the party buzzed around us with everyone trying to process these revelations and probably gossiping about how they'd treated me over the years. Diego came over with champagne for all 3 of us. I think this calls for a toast. To Elena, the biggest bamboozle in family history. You let us all think you were broke while you were actually bawling. Respect. I couldn't help but laugh at his characterization. Several other cousins came over to apologize for their assumptions and treatment over the years. Most of them seemed genuine, though I noticed a few were already looking at me differently. Not with pity now, but with the kind of opportunistic interest people get when they realize you have money and might be useful to them. The party continued, but the dynamic had completely shifted. People wanted to talk to me now, to ask about my work and my properties and my investments. Suddenly my career was fascinating instead of confusing. Suddenly people were interested in AI and machine learning and wanted to understand what I actually did. Suddenly I was worth paying attention to. It was vindicating in some ways, but also deeply sad. These people had known me my entire life. My intelligence and capabilities hadn't changed in the last 30 minutes. Only their perception of me had changed because now they had visible, conventional markers of success to contextualize my worth. Vanessa eventually emerged from the bathroom, her carefully applied makeup smeared and her face blotchy from crying and vomiting. She looked at me once with an expression I couldn't quite read. Humiliation, anger, regret, something else? Then grabbed her husband's arm and headed for the door. We're leaving, she announced to no one in particular. I don't feel well. Please stay, I called out, my voice carrying across the room. She stopped and turned back, hope flashing briefly across her face. After all, your mother paid $25,000 for this evening. You should at least get your money's worth out of my home. The hope died immediately, replaced by shame. She left without another word, her husband trailing behind her with an apologetic shrug toward the room. After Vanessa's dramatic exit, Aunt Patricia stood there for a long moment, clearly wrestling with whether to follow her daughter or try to salvage the situation. Finally, she approached me with an expression that was trying very hard to look apologetic, but mostly just looked uncomfortable. Elena, I think perhaps we've all gotten off on the wrong foot this evening, she began, her voice taking on that formal, diplomatic tone she used when she was trying to smooth over conflicts. There have clearly been some misunderstandings over the years about your circumstances. They weren't misunderstandings, I interrupted calmly. They were deliberate judgments based on ignorance and condescension. You understood perfectly well that you thought I was a failure. You just didn't bother to verify whether your judgment was accurate before acting on it for years. She flinched slightly but pressed on. Regardless, I think we can all agree that family is more important than these kinds of petty disagreements. Your grandmother's birthday should be a time for unity and celebration, not for dwelling on past hurts or miscommunications. I agree completely, I said pleasantly, which is why I'm staying at the party to celebrate Abuela's birthday and choosing not to make a bigger issue out of the years of disrespect I've endured from you and Vanessa. I'm being remarkably gracious about this entire situation, all things considered. Gracious? Aunt Patricia's diplomatic mask slipped slightly, revealing the anger underneath. You just humiliated my daughter in front of the entire family. You deliberately withheld information about your success to make us all look foolish. That's not gracious. That's vindictive. No, Aunt Patricia. I lived my life privately, while you and Vanessa made assumptions and judgments without having any actual information. The only thing I'm guilty of is not correcting your false narrative sooner. But you know what? I wasn't obligated to prove my success to you. I wasn't required to share my financial information to protect myself from your contempt. You were obligated as family to treat me with basic respect regardless of my income or career status. You failed at that obligation spectacularly. My cousin Jorge, who worked in finance and was apparently better at math than emotional intelligence, chose this moment to interject enthusiastically. Elena, I've been thinking about your investment portfolio. With $78 million in assets, you really should be working with a professional wealth manager to optimize your returns. I actually have some contacts who... I have a wealth management team, I said, cutting off what was clearly about to become a sales pitch. I'm quite satisfied with their performance, but thank you for the concern. Right, of course, he backtracked. I just thought that family connections might... No, I said firmly. I don't mix family and business. That's been a good policy so far, and I plan to continue it. I could see the disappointment flash across his face, and I knew exactly what he'd been thinking, that my wealth was now a resource he could potentially tap into through family connections. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that he wouldn't be the last family member to start seeing me as an opportunity rather than a person. If you've made it this far, hit that like button, because what happened over the next few weeks when word spread through the extended family was absolutely wild. My grandmother beckoned me over again, and I gratefully escaped the increasingly awkward conversations to sit with her. She studied my face with those sharp eyes that had always seen more than people gave her credit for. Are you happy, mija? She asked quietly so only I could hear. The question surprised me. What do you mean, abuela? With your success, with your money, with your life, are you actually happy? Or did you build all of this trying to prove something to people whose opinions shouldn't have mattered so much? I thought about that seriously. I think I'm happy with my work. The research I do is genuinely important and fascinating. The problems I'm trying to solve could help millions of people. That feels meaningful and satisfying. The money is nice. It provides security and options and freedom. But you're right that some of it was probably driven by wanting to prove everyone wrong. I wanted to be so undeniably successful that no one could ever dismiss me again. And now that you've proven it, she pressed, now that they all know, does it feel the way you thought it would? Honestly, it feels kind of hollow. They're treating me differently now, but it's because of the money, not because they've suddenly developed better judgment or character. The people who were cruel to me are trying to be nice now. But it's not real niceness. It's opportunistic niceness, because they think I might be useful to them. That doesn't actually feel good. My grandmother nodded wisely. Money reveals character. It doesn't change it. It reveals it. You're seeing now who people really are when they think you have something they want. Some will disappoint you. Some might surprise you. Pay attention to how they act over the next few months. That will tell you everything you need to know about who deserves a place in your life. What should I do about Vanessa and Aunt Patricia? I asked. They're family, but they've been so consistently cruel. You don't owe cruel people your time or energy just because you share DNA, my grandmother said firmly. Family is about how you treat each other, not just blood relation. If they can genuinely apologize and change their behavior, maybe there's a path forward. But if they just want access to your money and success while maintaining the same disrespectful attitude, you're better off without them. The party continued for several more hours, but I found myself watching everyone with new eyes. My parents stayed close to me, clearly trying to make up for years of misunderstanding and disappointment. My siblings seemed genuinely remorseful and interested in rebuilding our relationships on better foundations. But others, I could see the calculations happening. Cousins who'd barely spoken to me in years suddenly wanted to chat at length about business opportunities. Aunts and uncles who dismissed me started asking if I might be interested in investing in their children's ventures or helping with various family expenses that had come up. People who'd treated me like a charity case started treating me like a potential ATM machine. It was depressing how quickly people's treatment changed based solely on their perception of my wealth rather than any actual change in me as a person. As the party was winding down and people were starting to leave, my mother pulled me aside. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course, Mama. Are you angry with us? With your father and me? For not understanding? For comparing you to your siblings? For all the times we suggested you needed to make different choices? I considered the question carefully. I was hurt. I'm probably still hurt at some level. But I understand that you were coming from a place of love and concern, even if that concern was misguided. You wanted me to be secure and successful by the markers you understood. You weren't being deliberately cruel like Vanessa and Aunt Patricia. You were just confused and worried. We're so proud of you, my mother said, tears streaming down her face again. We've always been proud of you, even when we didn't show it properly. You're brilliant and accomplished, and you've built something amazing. I'm sorry we couldn't see it clearly enough to tell you that along the way. I know, Mama, it's okay. We're okay. But even as I reassured her, I was thinking about my grandmother's words about money revealing character. How would my parents have treated me if the startup had failed? If I'd stayed at that $60,000 salary for years, would they have been supportive or would the disappointment have continued? I wanted to believe they would have loved me regardless, but I honestly wasn't sure. Over the next few weeks, my phone exploded with messages from family members I'd barely heard from in years. Everyone suddenly wanted to reconnect, to catch up, to tell me about their lives, and oh, by the way, did I happen to be interested in investing in their cousin's tech startup, or their nephew's restaurant idea, or their sister's nonprofit? The most galling messages came from Vanessa and Aunt Patricia. Vanessa sent a long text message 3 days after the party. Elena, I've been doing a lot of thinking about what happened at Grandma's party. I realize that I may have said some things over the years that came across as hurtful. That was never my intention. I was just joking around the way family does. I've always thought of us as being close, and I hope you know that any teasing was coming from a place of sisterly affection. I'd love to get together for coffee soon and really catch up properly. I feel like we've lost touch and I miss having you in my life. Maybe you could give me some advice about career transitions. I've been thinking about making some changes, and you obviously have great instincts for success. Let me know when you're free. Love, Vanessa. The audacity was breathtaking. She'd literally compared me to mold less than a week ago. But now we were supposedly close family who'd just lost touch, and her years of cruel mockery were just friendly teasing. And of course, she wanted my advice on career transitions, which I suspected was code for wanting access to my network, or possibly even direct financial support. I didn't respond to that message, or to the 3 follow-up messages she sent over the next 2 weeks, each one increasingly desperate and confused about why I wasn't answering. Aunt Patricia's approach was different. She sent a formal letter, an actual physical letter, delivered to my San Francisco address, which she must have gotten from my mother. The letter was 3 pages of carefully constructed language about family bonds, the importance of forgiveness, how holding grudges only hurts the person holding them, and how she hoped we could move past any misunderstandings for the sake of family unity. Notably absent from the letter, an actual apology. She acknowledged that tensions had arisen and that perhaps some statements had been misinterpreted, but she never actually said she was sorry for years of disrespect and condescension. The whole letter was constructed to make me seem petty and vindictive for being hurt, rather than acknowledging that she'd been consistently cruel. I didn't respond to her letter either. Parents started getting pulled into the middle of it. Aunt Patricia called my mother crying about how I was being unreasonable and holding grudges, how she'd tried to reach out and make peace, but I was refusing to be gracious about past misunderstandings. Vanessa apparently had a breakdown to her mother about how I'd humiliated her, and now wouldn't even respond to her attempts at reconciliation. My mother, caught between her sister and her daughter, tried to mediate. Elena, mija, I know they hurt you, but they're trying to apologize in their own way. Can't you give them another chance? Patricia is my sister. This is tearing the family apart. Mama, they're not actually apologizing, I explained as patiently as I could. They're trying to rug sweep what they did so they can have access to my money and connections. Vanessa literally wants career advice and networking opportunities. Aunt Patricia wants family unity so she can benefit from my success, while never acknowledging how she treated me. That's not reconciliation, that's opportunism. But how will you know if they can change if you don't give them the opportunity? My mother pressed. They can demonstrate change by treating other people in the family with respect regardless of their income or career status. They can show growth by apologizing genuinely, without making it about what they can get from me. They can prove they've changed through their actions over time, not through words designed to manipulate me into giving them access to my wealth. My mother sighed heavily. You're probably right, but it's hard to watch my family fracture like this. I didn't fracture it, Mama. They did years ago through their consistent cruelty and judgment. I'm just refusing to pretend that fracture didn't happen. For the convenience of people who want something from me now, let me know in the comments. If you think I'm being too harsh or if you'd do the same thing in my situation, because what happened next made things even more complicated. About 2 months after my grandmother's party, something happened that forced me to make some difficult decisions about family and forgiveness and what I owed to people who'd treated me badly. My brother Marco called me late on a Tuesday night, which was unusual enough to make me immediately anxious. Elena, don't panic, but Mom's in the hospital. She had a minor stroke this afternoon. She's stable now, but the doctors want to run tests and keep her for observation. I was on a plane to Chicago the next morning, my work immediately understanding and supportive when I explained I had a family emergency. When I arrived at the hospital, I found my father in the waiting room looking older and more frightened than I'd ever seen him. Sophia was already there, having driven in from the suburbs. Marco arrived shortly after me. The stroke had been relatively minor. My mother had some temporary weakness on her left side and some speech difficulties, but the doctors were optimistic about recovery. Still, it was a stark reminder that my parents weren't getting any younger. That time with family was finite. That petty conflicts and hurt feelings seemed less important when faced with the possibility of loss. And who was sitting in that hospital waiting room when I arrived? Aunt Patricia and Vanessa, both of them having rushed over when they'd heard the news, because Patricia was my mother's sister, and they were, despite everything, family. The first few hours were awkward but manageable. We were all focused on my mother's health, getting updates from doctors, taking turns sitting with her when she was awake enough for visitors. Personal conflicts took a back seat to the immediate crisis. But as my mother stabilized and the immediate panic faded, the underlying tensions resurfaced. Vanessa tried to approach me during one of the long waiting periods. Elena, I'm glad you're here. I know things have been weird between us lately, but family is family. Especially in times like this. We should stick together. I am sticking with my family, I replied neutrally. I'm here for my mother, my father, and my siblings. That's my immediate family and my priority right now. I'm family too, she said, and I could hear a whine creeping into her voice. We grew up together. We used to be close when we were kids. Can't we get past whatever happened at that party and go back to how things used to be? Things used to be that you treated me like garbage, and I tolerated it because I thought that's what family loyalty meant, I said bluntly. I'm not interested in going back to that dynamic. If you want a different relationship with me, you need to start by acknowledging how you actually treated me, genuinely apologizing without qualifications or excuses, and demonstrating through consistent behavior over time that you've changed. A crisis doesn't erase years of cruelty. She looked hurt and angry. You're really going to hold a grudge forever over some stupid comments? I can't believe how petty you're being. Vanessa, you compared me to mold in front of 43 people while standing in my house that your mother had rented without knowing it was mine. That happened 2 months ago, not decades ago. You've sent me messages since then that don't actually apologize, but instead try to reframe your cruelty as friendly teasing and ask for career advice. You haven't shown any genuine remorse or understanding of why your behavior was wrong. So yes, I'm going to continue maintaining boundaries with someone who's proven repeatedly that they'll treat me badly. She opened her mouth to respond, but I walked away, done with the conversation. I had bigger things to worry about than Vanessa's feelings about being held accountable for her actions. Over the next week, as my mother recovered and regained strength, family dynamics continued to play out in complicated ways. My parents' brush with mortality made them reflective and emotional. My father pulled me aside one afternoon and said something that shifted my perspective slightly. Elena, I've been thinking a lot about what you said at your grandmother's party, about how we didn't support you properly, how we were disappointed in your choices without understanding them. You were right about all of it, but I want you to know something. Even when we were worried and confused about your career, even when we wished you'd made different choices, we never stopped loving you. We never stopped being proud of you as a person, even if we failed to show it properly. He paused, struggling with emotion. Seeing your mother like this, so fragile and vulnerable, it made me realize how much time we've wasted on stupid misunderstandings and failed communication. Life's too short for that. You don't owe us anything. You've built an incredible life despite our lack of support. But if you can find it in your heart to give us another chance to be better parents, to really know you and support you properly, I promise we'll do better. I hugged my father, both of us crying. I know you love me, Papa. I never doubted that, even when I was hurt by your disappointment. And I want us to have a better relationship going forward. We can do that. What about Patricia and Vanessa? He asked carefully. Your mother worries about the rift in the family. She feels caught in the middle. That's not fair to Mom, I said firmly. She shouldn't feel caught in the middle of a conflict where one side treated the other badly for years. But I'll tell you what. I'm not going to make things more difficult by being openly hostile or making Mom choose between us. I'll be civil to them at family events, but I'm not going to pretend we're close or give them access to my life and resources when they haven't earned it. They can prove over time that they've changed, and then we can reassess. My father nodded. That seems reasonable. More than reasonable, actually. By the time my mother was released from the hospital with a good prognosis and a plan for physical therapy, I'd come to some clarity about boundaries and family and what I owed to different people. I owed my parents grace and a fresh start because, despite their misunderstandings, they'd always loved me and were genuinely trying to do better. I owed my siblings continued rebuilding of our relationships because they'd acknowledged their mistakes sincerely and were making efforts to support me better. I owed my grandmother everything because she'd been consistently wise and loving through all of this. But I didn't owe Vanessa or Aunt Patricia anything beyond basic civility at family gatherings. I didn't owe them forgiveness they hadn't earned. I didn't owe them access to my success when they'd mocked my struggles. I didn't owe them my time, energy, or resources just because we shared DNA, and they'd decided I might be useful now. About 6 months after the hospital incident, I was back in Chicago for Thanksgiving. The family gathered at my Uncle Roberto's house, not at my penthouse, notably, even though it would have been a much nicer venue. I'd made it clear that my home wasn't available for family events, at least not until trust was rebuilt. Vanessa was there with her husband, and I could see she'd lost weight and looked stressed. Through family gossip, because families always gossip, I'd heard that her marriage was struggling and her career had stalled. She'd been hoping to leverage our renewed connection for networking opportunities that never materialized because I maintained firm boundaries. She watched me throughout the evening with an expression I couldn't quite read: resentment, envy, regret, maybe all three. At one point, she approached me in the kitchen when I was helping prepare food. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. "We are talking," I replied, continuing to chop vegetables. Really talk. About everything. I put down the knife and looked at her directly. "Okay, talk." She took a deep breath. "I was horrible to you. For years, I was jealous and insecure, and I took it out on you by mocking your choices and your career and making you feel small. It was wrong. I'm sorry." I waited to see if there was more. When she didn't continue, I asked, "Why were you jealous? You seemed to have everything you wanted. Good job, nice apartment, successful husband, all the external markers of success." "Because none of it felt real," she admitted, tears forming in her eyes. "My job is fine, but not particularly meaningful. My marriage is falling apart because Derek and I don't actually like each other very much. We just like the idea of being a successful power couple. My life looks good from the outside, but it feels empty. And you always seemed to actually believe in what you were doing. You were passionate about your work, even when it didn't pay well or impress anyone. You had this authenticity and purpose that I didn't have. I resented you for it. It was the most honest thing Vanessa had ever said to me. Thank you for telling me that. That actually means something. Can we start over?" she asked hopefully. "Not go back to how things were, but maybe build something better going forward?" I thought about my grandmother's advice about paying attention to how people act over time. Maybe. But it's going to take time and consistent effort on your part. I need to see that this honesty and self-awareness sticks. That you can treat me with respect over months and years. Not just have one good conversation and expect everything to be fixed. Can you do that? "I can try," she said. "I want to try. Then we'll see," I replied. "But Vanessa, you should know that even if we rebuild some kind of relationship, it's never going to be like it was when we were kids. I'm not going to be your networking connection or your business opportunity or your way into exclusive circles. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be because we actually like and respect each other, not because you think I'm useful." "I understand," she said quietly. "That's fair." Over the next year, Vanessa did actually make consistent efforts to change her behavior. She apologized to others in the family for things she'd said over the years. She went to therapy to work on her insecurity and jealousy issues. She got divorced from Derek and started rebuilding her life on more authentic foundations. And gradually, tentatively, we started to rebuild some kind of relationship. Not sisters exactly, but maybe something like friendly cousins. Aunt Patricia never really came around. She remained convinced that I was being unreasonable and holding grudges unfairly. She made occasional efforts to engage with me at family events, but they always felt performative rather than genuine. Eventually, I accepted that some relationships just weren't salvageable, and that was okay. My parents and I grew much closer over that year. They made genuine efforts to understand my work and be supportive without judgment. My father started reading articles about artificial intelligence and machine learning, so he could have informed conversations with me about my research. My mother stopped comparing me to my siblings and started appreciating me for who I actually was. It wasn't perfect, but it was real and getting better. 2 years after that infamous birthday party, I hosted a small dinner at my penthouse, just my parents, siblings, grandmother, and a few cousins who'd always been supportive. It was intimate and warm, filled with genuine affection and interest in each other's lives. As I looked around at the people gathered in my beautiful home, I realized something important. Money and success hadn't actually changed my life in the ways that mattered most. The penthouse was nice, the financial security was comforting, the professional achievements were satisfying, but what really mattered was having people in my life who saw me clearly, valued me authentically, and supported me genuinely. The revelation at the party 2 years ago hadn't magically fixed anything. It had just forced everyone to confront realities they'd been ignoring. Some people rose to the challenge and did the work to build better relationships. Others didn't. And I'd learned that I didn't owe my time and energy to people who chose not to do that work, regardless of DNA. My grandmother pulled me aside as the evening was winding down. "You look happy, mija." "Genuinely happy, not just successful. I am happy, abuela. I have work I love, financial security, and people in my life who actually see me and value me for who I am. That's all I ever really wanted. Good, she said, squeezing my hand. That's what success really looks like. Not the money or the property, but the quality of your life and relationships. You've built something good here. I'm proud of you. 3 months later, I received a message from Vanessa. She'd gotten a new job that she was genuinely excited about, working for a nonprofit focused on youth education. It paid less than her corporate position, but felt more meaningful to her. She was dating someone who she actually connected with as a person. She was building a life that felt authentic rather than impressive. Thanks for holding boundaries with me, she wrote. I was angry about it at the time, but you were right. I needed to actually change, not just expect forgiveness without doing the work. I'm in a better place now because you refused to let me get away with superficial apologies and opportunistic reconnection. That was a gift, even though it didn't feel like it at the time. I read her message several times, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Vindication that I'd been right to maintain boundaries, satisfaction that someone had actually done the work to change, sadness for the years we'd wasted in toxicity, hope that maybe, eventually, we'd build something genuinely good between us. Looking back now, 4 years after that party where everything came out, I can say that the revelation of my success did change things, but not in the ways you might expect. It didn't make me happier or more fulfilled. It didn't fix my relationships automatically. It didn't make shallow people suddenly become deep. What it did do was force everyone to confront their assumptions and prejudices. It revealed character, both good and bad. It showed me who was capable of growth and who wasn't. It taught me that money doesn't change people. It reveals them. And it gave me the clarity and confidence to build the life and relationships I actually wanted, rather than settling for what I thought family loyalty required. The penthouse is still mine. I still rent it out for events occasionally, though I'm more selective about who I rent to now. And yes, it still makes me smile every time I remember Vanessa comparing me to mold while standing in my own home without knowing it. Sometimes, karma doesn't need your help. Sometimes, you just need to live your truth, maintain your boundaries, and let reality speak for itself. The people who matter will see it. The people who don't weren't worth convincing anyway. And that's the real lesson I learned from being mocked at my own penthouse party. Your worth isn't determined by other people's perception of you. It's determined by how you show up in the world, the work you do, the values you uphold, and the quality of the life you build. Everything else is just noise. So to answer the question that started this whole story, yes, I own the penthouse. But more importantly, I own my life, my choices, and my boundaries. And that's worth more than all the real estate in the world. If you made it to the end of this story, drop a comment telling me what you would have done. Would you have revealed your success earlier? Or would you have let them keep making assumptions? Would you have forgiven Vanessa? Or maintained boundaries like I did? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. And if this story resonated with you, make sure you're subscribed because everyone has stories about family dynamics and assumptions and the complicated work of deciding who deserves access to your life. You're not alone in navigating these difficult relationships. Thanks for listening to my story. Now go build a life so good that other people's opinions become irrelevant. That's the real revenge.